Before we delve into this story, please be advised that it contains themes of historical conspiracy, psychological tension, and unsettling discoveries that some listeners may find intense. The year was 1893. Chicago, a city forged in ambition and steel, stood ready to unveil its masterpiece, the world's Columbian Exposition. A shimmering white city rose from the marshlands of Jackson Park, a testament to American ingenuity, a beacon of progress and an architectural marvel that captivated the world. Millions flocked to witness its wonders, from the nascent Ferris wheel to Tesla's electrifying displays. It was a golden age, a celebration of human potential. But what if I told you that beneath that pristine facade, within the very foundations of that gleaming metropolis, a shadow project was underway? A secret so profound, so terrifying, that it was deliberately buried, meant to remain hidden for eternity. Fast forward to the present day. The relentless march of progress, even in a city as storied as Chicago, means old structures must eventually yield to new. It was during a routine demolition, a project intended to replace a derelict warehouse near the old Exposition grounds, that the first crack in history's carefully constructed narrative began to appear. The building itself was nothing remarkable, a nondescript brick shell erected sometime in the early 20th century, but its foundations, as it turned out, were far older, far deeper, and far more secretive than anyone could have imagined. Dr. Evelyn Reed, a brilliant but often underestimated historian specializing in forgotten American industrial architecture and its social impact, received the call on a Tuesday. Her phone buzzed with the unfamiliar number of the city's Historical Preservation Office. They had found something unusual, they said, during the preliminary excavation. Standard procedure dictated a qualified historian assess the findings. Evelyn, ever eager to escape the dusty confines of academia for real-world discovery, agreed without hesitation. She imagined a forgotten time capsule, perhaps some mundane artifacts relating to the warehouse's original purpose, maybe even a few relics from the fair itself, swept under the rug of time and urban sprawl. What she found, however, was anything but mundane. The demolition site was a controlled chaos of roaring machinery and dust-choked air. After navigating through the usual safety protocols, Evelyn was led to a section of the excavation pit, deeper than expected, where the foreman, a gruff but clearly rattled man named Frank, pointed a trembling finger. "We hit something solid, Doc," he grunted, wiping sweat from his brow. "Thought it was bedrock at first, but it ain't natural." What lay exposed was not bedrock, but a perfectly smooth, almost seamless wall of dark, polished basalt, unlike any stone native to the region. It stretched horizontally, disappearing into the earth on both sides, and vertically, its depth unknown. There were no mortar lines, no visible seams, just an unnerving uniformity. It was clearly man-made, but with a precision that defied the technology of the late 19th century. As the crew carefully cleared more debris, a faint, almost imperceptible line became visible, hinting at a hidden entrance. It took another full day of painstaking work, using specialized tools, to reveal what Evelyn could only describe as an impossibly intricate locking mechanism, a series of interlocking bronze gears and levers embedded directly into the stone. It looked less like a door and more like the entrance to a vault designed to withstand the apocalypse. Evelyn, her heart pounding a rhythm against her ribs, meticulously documented every detail. This wasn't just an old foundation. It was a meticulously concealed subterranean chamber. With the help of the demolition crew, who were now more intrigued than annoyed, they managed to activate the mechanism. With a low metallic groan that resonated deep within the earth, a section of the basalt wall slid inward, then glided silently to the side, revealing a dark, cavernous space. The air that rushed out was cold, stagnant, and carried a faint coppery scent that Evelyn couldn't quite place. Armed with powerful LED lamps, she was the first to step inside. The chamber was surprisingly large, roughly 20 by 20 feet, with a ceiling so high it disappeared into the shadows. The walls were lined with the same obsidian-like basalt, reflecting the lamplight in an unsettling, almost predatory gleam. But it was the contents that stole her breath. This was no ordinary storage vault. In the center, arranged on what appeared to be a stone pedestal, was a collection of objects that defied immediate classification. There were no gold coins, no precious jewels. Instead, she saw a series of polished copper plates, etched with intricate geometric diagrams that pulsed with an almost hypnotic complexity. Beside them, peculiar instruments crafted from brass and dark wood sat silent, their purpose utterly alien. One resembled a large, ornate tuning fork, but with a series of tiny vibrating filaments. Another was a sphere of polished steel, suspended within an intricate cage of copper wire, its surface covered in minuscule, almost microscopic symbols. They looked like forgotten prototypes from a mad scientist's lab, yet their craftsmanship was exquisite, almost artistic. But the most compelling discovery was a heavily bound, leather-clad journal, resting on a smaller separate stone block. Its cover was unmarked, devoid of title or author, its leather aged to a deep dark mahogany. It was secured with a unique, almost puzzle-like clasp that Evelyn, drawing on her extensive knowledge of historical locking mechanisms, managed to open after several tense minutes. The pages within were brittle, yellowed with age, filled with a precise, almost frantic script. The ink was faded but legible. She carefully, reverently turned to the first page. The date at the top read May 12, 1893, and beneath it a name, Arthur Finch. Evelyn's mind immediately raced. Arthur Finch. The name resonated from the forgotten corners of her research. A minor architect, known for his eccentric designs and a brief, controversial stint as a consultant for some of the Exposition's lesser-known pavilions. He had vanished without a trace shortly after the fair closed, his disappearance largely overshadowed by the grandeur and eventual dismantling of the White City. Many assumed he'd simply moved on, or succumbed to one of the era's common ailments. No one had ever suspected he'd been involved in something so profound, so secretive. The initial entries in Finch's journal were mundane, detailing his frustrations with bureaucratic red tape and the overwhelming scale of the Exposition. But then the tone shifted dramatically. He wrote of being recruited, not for architectural consultation, but for a special project. A project sanctioned by powerful benefactors, individuals whose influence stretched far beyond the Exposition grounds, into the highest echelons of Chicago society and beyond. He referred to them vaguely as the Guild. Finch's handwriting became more erratic, his words charged with a growing sense of awe and dread. He described clandestine meetings, secret passages beneath the fair, and a great work being undertaken in a hidden facility. He wrote of strange experiments, of energy manipulation, and of a device he termed the Whispering Machine. His entries detailed how this machine, and the other instruments Evelyn had just discovered, were not merely scientific curiosities but tools. Tools used for something far more sinister than generating electricity or displaying marvels. He spoke of extracting, of transferring, of recalibrating. He wrote of things being taken from people, their memories, their vitality, their very essence, all under the guise of progress and scientific advancement. His tone became increasingly paranoid, fearful. He believed he was being watched, that his life was in danger for merely witnessing the truth. Evelyn felt a chill that had nothing to do with the stale air of the chamber. This wasn't just a historical footnote, it was a confession, a desperate warning from a man who had stumbled upon a truth too terrible to bear. The instruments in the chamber, the copper plates with their baffling diagrams, they weren't just relics. They were the physical evidence of Finch's horrifying claims. If his words were true, the White City, that shining symbol of American optimism, was a meticulously crafted veil, hiding a conspiracy that exploited the very people who flocked to its wonders. A dark, insidious experiment conducted on an unprecedented scale, right beneath the feet of millions. The stakes were suddenly immense. This wasn't just about uncovering a forgotten piece of history. It was about exposing a dangerous secret, a technology, a power, that had been deliberately suppressed. And if it was dangerous enough to be buried for over a century, what would happen if it was unearthed today? Evelyn had an immediate, chilling premonition. The journal wasn't just a historical document, it was a ticking time bomb. What secrets did Arthur Finch bury? And why did he risk everything to hide them beneath the most celebrated event in American history? The answers, Evelyn knew, were just beginning to surface, and they promised to shatter everything she thought she knew about the Gilded Age. Evelyn's hands trembled, not from the cold, but from the sheer weight of history she now held. Carefully, painstakingly, she extracted the small lead-lined box from its damp earthen tomb. The metal was surprisingly intact, a testament to its protective purpose, though its surface bore the telltale green patina of a century and more spent buried. Inside, nestled on a bed of what looked like desiccated cotton, were not jewels or gold, but something far more valuable to a historian: documents. They were bound with brittle, faded ribbon, wrapped in oilskin that had done its job admirably, preserving the paper from the ravages of time and moisture. Evelyn gently carried her precious cargo back to her small, overheated office, the scent of damp earth and aged paper clinging to her. The first rule of archaeology, she reminded herself, was preservation. Every movement was deliberate, every breath held. Under the harsh glare of her desk lamp, she began the delicate process of unearthing the past. The oilskin unfolded with a soft crackle, revealing several thick packets of paper. The top packet contained what appeared to be a journal, its leather cover warped but its pages still legible. The script, a meticulous looping hand, was difficult to read at first, illuminated by the flickering gaslight of a bygone era. The journal belonged to a man named Thomas Miller. The opening entry spoke of his arrival in Chicago in 1891, a young engineer drawn by the colossal undertaking of the world's Columbian Exposition. His words painted vivid pictures of the White City, rising from the swampy shores of Lake Michigan. The grandeur of the administration building, the shimmering lagoon, the monumental task of constructing a city designed to last only 6 months. Thomas was initially filled with optimism, a sense of participating in something truly historic. He was assigned to the Department of Works, specifically to the intricate plumbing and drainage systems beneath the fairgrounds, a detail that instantly clicked with where Evelyn had found the box. But as Evelyn delved deeper into Thomas's entries, the tone began to shift. The enthusiasm gave way to unease, then to a growing sense of dread. He spoke of anomalies in the plans, discrepancies in material orders, and odd nocturnal work crews operating under unusual secrecy. He mentioned an unforeseen subterranean network and unauthorized excavations far deeper than the fair's official blueprints indicated. These were not the casual observations of a busy engineer. They were the meticulous records of a man deeply troubled by what he was witnessing. One entry, dated October 1892, chilled Evelyn to the bone. Asterisk, the further we dig, the less sense it makes. They speak of foundations for a permanent installation, yet everything here is temporary. The secrecy surrounding Sector 7 grows daily. Men disappear. Questions are met with blank stares or threats veiled in polite warnings. I fear what lies beneath the manufacturer's building. It is not merely a display of human ingenuity, it is a deception. Asterisk. Sector 7. The manufacturer's building. Evelyn immediately pulled up digitized maps of the 1893 World's Fair. The Manufacturers and Liberal Arts Building was one of the largest structures ever built at the time, a colossal exhibition hall. It was a marvel of engineering, but what could be hidden beneath it that would warrant such secrecy and fear? The journal continued, detailing Thomas's increasing isolation. He tried to confide in colleagues, but they either dismissed his concerns or seemed to genuinely know nothing. He began to suspect a larger conspiracy, not just among a few corrupt contractors, but involving powerful figures behind the exposition itself. He wrote of hushed conversations he overheard, mentioning the society and the legacy. These cryptic references offered no immediate answers, only more questions. Evelyn carefully turned to the next packet of documents. These were not personal entries, but what looked like official reports, albeit heavily redacted and written in a coded shorthand that Evelyn couldn't immediately decipher. They bore no official letterhead, no direct signatures, but the language hinted at government oversight, or perhaps something even more clandestine. Scattered among these reports were hand-drawn diagrams, stark and unsettling. They depicted complex tunnel systems, reinforced subterranean chambers, and strange geometric symbols that seemed to recur. One diagram, in particular, showed a multi-layered structure directly beneath the footprint of the Manufacturers and Liberal Arts Building, extending far deeper than any known basement or utility tunnel. A wave of cold doubt washed over Evelyn. Could this be real? Could something so monumental have been hidden for over a century, right under the noses of historians and the public? The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. If true, it would rewrite a significant chapter of American history. She spent the next few days in a blur, fueled by coffee and an insatiable curiosity. She cross-referenced Thomas Miller's journal entries with official exposition records, newspaper archives, and architectural plans. There was no mention of a Thomas Miller in any official capacity in the Department of Works. It was as if he had been deliberately erased, or perhaps he had worked under an assumed identity. Yet, his detailed descriptions of the fair's construction, the personalities involved, and even specific minor incidents were too accurate to be fabricated. The coded reports were a significant hurdle. Evelyn, while a brilliant historian, was not a cryptographer. She knew she needed help, but who could she trust with such a potentially explosive discovery? The implications were staggering. Unearthing this secret now could have profound repercussions, not least for her own career and safety. She thought of David Chun, a brilliant but eccentric archivist at the Newberry Library, known for his ability to unearth obscure historical documents and decipher forgotten languages. David was meticulous, discreet, and possessed an almost encyclopedic knowledge of late 19th century Chicago. He was her best, perhaps only option. Gathering a selection of the coded reports and the most unsettling diagrams, Evelyn made her way to the Newberry. The library, with its hushed grandeur and scent of ancient paper, felt like a sanctuary. David, a man perpetually surrounded by towering stacks of books, greeted her with his usual distracted enthusiasm. "Evelyn, my dear, what fascinating morsel of the past have you unearthed now?" he asked, adjusting his spectacles. Evelyn laid the documents on his desk, carefully explaining their provenance without revealing the exact location of her discovery. She recounted the story of Thomas Miller, the shifting tone of his journal, and the chilling references to Sector 7 and the manufacturer's building. David listened, his initial amusement giving way to a focused intensity. He picked up one of the coded reports, his fingers tracing the strange symbols. "This isn't a standard telegraph code, nor any common military cipher from the period," he murmured, pulling a magnifying glass closer. "The structure, it's sophisticated, almost personalized." He spent hours poring over the documents, comparing the symbols to various historical ciphers, cross-referencing them with known secret society codes from the era. Evelyn watched, a knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. The more time David spent on them, the more real this all became. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, David let out a low whistle. "Evelyn, this is intriguing. I found a pattern. It's a variant of a Vigenère cipher, but with a unique key phrase. And the key, it appears to be embedded within the non-redacted text itself. A very clever, very paranoid system." He began to work, a flurry of scribbled notes and frantic cross-referencing. Slowly, painfully, words began to emerge from the jumble of symbols. The first sentence David deciphered sent a jolt through Evelyn. Asterisk Project Chimera. Phase 2 initiated. Containment protocols for Specimen 001 critical. The White City's foundation must conceal our work from prying eyes. Security paramount. Any breaches jeopardizing the Exposition's facade will be met with extreme prejudice. Asterisk. Evelyn stared, her mind reeling. Project Chimera? Specimen 001? Extreme prejudice? This was far beyond a simple construction fraud or a secret society. This sounded like something out of a science fiction novel, yet it was buried beneath the most celebrated event in American history. The carefully manicured image of the 1893 World's Fair, a beacon of progress and enlightenment, began to crack, revealing a dark, unsettling truth beneath its gleaming veneer. David continued to decipher, his voice hushed. "Another entry here, Evelyn. From November 1892, asterisk the incident in Sector 7 has been contained. Casualties minimal, confined to unregistered personnel. Public exposure averted. The integrity of the fair remains intact. All evidence of Specimen 001's escape attempt eradicated. Increased security measures implemented, including the installation of a new, reinforced subterranean barrier. Miller is becoming a liability. Monitor his activities closely." Asterisk. Thomas Miller. His name, once a lone voice of dissent, now appeared in these clandestine reports, marked as a liability. Evelyn's blood ran cold. The man who had buried the box was not just an observer. He was a target. And the Specimen 001's escape attempt? What in God's name was hidden beneath the manufacturer's building? What kind of specimen could escape, cause casualties, and threaten the integrity of an entire World's Fair? The questions piled up, each more chilling than the last, drawing Evelyn deeper into a century-old conspiracy that now felt terrifyingly alive. Evelyn's breath hitched, the stark reality of the faded ink on the page a physical blow. A specimen. Not an animal, not a human, but a specimen. The clinical term sent a shiver down her spine, conjuring images of something unnatural, something created. Project Chimera. The name itself was a grotesque whisper from the past, echoing the mythical beast, a monstrous fusion of disparate parts. This wasn't just a cover-up. It was a fabrication woven into the very fabric of the city's triumphant history, a dark secret buried beneath the gleaming facade of the White City. Her mind raced, connecting the dots that suddenly illuminated a terrifying pattern. David's cryptic warnings, the strange disappearances in the old tunnels, the unsettling feeling of being watched. Could it all be linked to this century-old incident? Was the specimen still out there? Or had its legacy, its purpose, continued in some horrifying form? She knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that she couldn't just walk away. The official records, the sanitized histories of the 1893 World's Fair, wouldn't breathe a word of Project Chimera. This wasn't something you found in a library book. This was something deliberately, ruthlessly suppressed. Evelyn spent the rest of the day in a frantic, almost desperate search. She combed through digital archives, cross-referencing keywords from the document: World's Columbian Exposition, unforeseen incident, containment protocol, specimen research. Nothing. Not a single mention outside the cryptic report she'd found. It was as if the events of July 1893, when this specimen had supposedly escaped, had been surgically excised from the historical record. The silence was deafening, a testament to the power of those who had orchestrated the cover-up. Frustration gnawed at her, but beneath it, a cold resolve hardened. If the official channels were dead ends, she'd have to look elsewhere. She thought about the kind of people who might know about the gaps in history, the whispers that never made it into textbooks: eccentric academics, independent historians, collectors of forgotten lore. That evening, hunched over her laptop in the quiet of her apartment, she started digging. She searched for unexplained phenomena, 1893 Chicago, World's Fair conspiracy theories, forgotten architects of the Exposition. It was a long shot, a dive into the murky waters of fringe history, but she was out of options. Hours bled into one another, illuminated only by the glow of her screen. Just as she was about to give up, a name surfaced from a dusty online forum dedicated to obscure Chicago history: Dr. Arthur Finch. The post was old, from 2008, a rambling commentary on a forgotten newspaper article about unusual structural anomalies found during the construction of an early subway line. The poster, identifying himself only as AF, had hinted at deeper secrets beneath the White City, mentioning unconventional engineering and unaccounted-for expenditures from the fair era. There was an email address, almost certainly defunct, but a quick search revealed a current affiliation: retired professor of urban archaeology, University of Chicago. Evelyn felt a jolt of adrenaline. Urban archaeology? Someone who studied what was beneath the city, not just on its surface. This was exactly what she needed. The next morning, Evelyn found Dr. Arthur Finch in his cluttered office, a small dusty sanctuary tucked away in a lesser-known wing of the university. Bookshelves groaned under the weight of ancient tomes and stacks of yellowed maps. The air hung heavy with the scent of old paper and lukewarm coffee. Dr. Finch himself was a man in his late 70s, with a shock of unruly white hair and eyes that twinkled with an almost childlike curiosity, though tempered by years of academic skepticism. "Miss Hayes, is it?" he asked, peering over spectacles perched precariously on his nose. "My assistant mentioned you had an unusual inquiry." "Dr. Finch," Evelyn began, trying to keep her voice steady, "I'm investigating some historical anomalies related to the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition. Specifically, I've come across a reference to an unregistered project, something called Project Chimera, and an incident that occurred in July of 1893. The name Project Chimera hung in the air, a discordant note in the professor's quiet office. Dr. Finch's twinkling eyes narrowed, and a subtle shift in his demeanor told Evelyn she had struck a nerve. The playful curiosity evaporated, replaced by a guarded intensity. "Project Chimera," he repeated slowly, tasting the words. "That's a name I haven't heard in a very long time, and certainly not in any official capacity." He leaned back in his creaking chair, steepling his fingers. "You understand, Miss Hayes, that a great many rumors circulated during and after the fair. It was an age of invention, but also of superstition. People saw marvels, and they also imagined horrors." "This wasn't a rumor, Dr. Finch," Evelyn insisted, pulling out a blurred photocopy of the document she'd found. She'd carefully redacted any identifying marks to protect her source, but the key terms were visible. This is from a classified internal report. It mentions a specimen escaping, casualties, and a containment effort that threatened the integrity of the entire fair. Dr. Finch took the paper, his fingers surprisingly steady, tracing the faded words. He didn't scoff, didn't dismiss it outright. Instead, a thoughtful frown creased his brow. He murmured to himself, July 1893, Containment Protocol, Integrity of the Fair. He looked up at Evelyn, a new light in his eyes, no longer skeptical but deeply thoughtful. I've dedicated my life to unearthing the forgotten layers of this city, Ms. Hayes, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that the official narrative of the World's Fair is a carefully constructed illusion. What you found, it resonates with certain legends, whispers that were always dismissed as sensationalism. Legends? Evelyn pressed, leaning forward. Yes, tales of strange lights, unusual activity in the less accessible pavilions, particularly those dedicated to scientific advancement and experimental technologies. There were rumors of late-night deliveries, unusual security details. Most people attributed it to secrecy surrounding new inventions or even industrial espionage. But there were darker undertones. Stories of workers who vanished, of unexplained structural damage to certain temporary buildings that were hastily repaired or demolished. He paused, adjusting his spectacles. My own interest was piqued when I was researching the early development of Chicago's subway system. You see, the original plans for the underground infrastructure of the fair itself were far more extensive than what was publicly known. There were service tunnels, utility conduits, even subterranean transport systems for moving exhibits and supplies. Some of these older structures were later repurposed or simply built over, when the city expanded its own subway network decades later. Evelyn's heart pounded. The tunnels. David was investigating the old tunnels. Indeed. And what's interesting, Dr. Finch continued, oblivious to Evelyn's interjection, is that I stumbled upon some fragmented, unofficial blueprints from a junior architect involved in the fair's construction. These weren't publicly filed, likely because they detailed an extension, a subterranean complex, beneath the liberal arts and machinery buildings. It was labeled simply Experimental Annex Section C. The plans were incomplete, almost deliberately obscured, but they showed an unusual layout, a series of reinforced chambers and access shafts that didn't seem to serve any conventional purpose. And the depths? They went far deeper than any standard utility tunnel. He rose, shuffling towards a towering stack of rolled-up maps in a corner. I always suspected it was some kind of clandestine research facility. The scale, the secrecy, the extraordinary budget allocations I found in obscure financial ledgers, it always pointed to something more than just a new type of light bulb or a better steam engine. And the name? Chimera. He pulled out a yellowed roll, carefully unfurling it on a large, dusty table. Look here, he pointed, his finger tracing faded lines. This is the original layout of the fairgrounds. And this? He tapped a section beneath where the machinery hall and the Palace of Fine Arts would have stood. This is the experimental annex. Notice the dotted lines leading off, far beyond the official boundaries, towards the undeveloped lands to the west. And this symbol? He pointed to a small, almost imperceptible icon near the deepest chamber. It looked like a stylized, jagged claw mark. I could never decipher its meaning, but it always felt ominous. Evelyn stared at the map, a cold dread seeping into her bones. The dotted lines, the unconventional engineering, the experimental annex. It was all falling into place with a terrifying precision. Could this annex, she asked, her voice barely a whisper, have been where Project Chimera was conducted? And could those dotted lines represent an escape route? Or perhaps a pathway to a different kind of containment? Dr. Finch looked at her, his expression grim. It's certainly plausible. But if something truly did escape from that depth, and if it was powerful enough to cause casualties and threaten the integrity of the entire fair, then its suppression would have been absolute, and its continued existence, or the existence of its legacy, would be a secret guarded with extreme prejudice. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Ms. Hayes, you've stumbled onto something far grander and far more dangerous than historical curiosity. There are powers that would go to great lengths to keep such a secret buried. If what you suspect is true, if this specimen had some connection to the disappearances in the tunnels, then you are walking on very thin ice. Just then a faint rhythmic thumping began. coming from somewhere deep within the building, vibrating through the floor. It was a low, insistent sound like a distant, heavy heartbeat. Dr. Finch tensed, his eyes darting towards the door. "What was that?" he muttered, more to himself than to Evelyn. "They're usually quiet this time of day." The thumping grew louder, closer, accompanied by a faint metallic scraping. It sounded like something was moving through the old utility tunnels beneath the university, something large and deliberate. A chill snaked up Evelyn's spine. She remembered the sound she'd heard in the Chicago metro tunnels, the same unsettling resonance. Dr. Finch's usually serene face was etched with a sudden, profound fear. He grabbed Evelyn's arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "You need to leave, Miss Hayes. Now. And you need to be very, very careful. Some secrets don't want to stay buried. And some things never truly die." The thumping intensified, and a low guttural growl seemed to emanate from beneath their feet, shaking the very foundations of the old university building. The very air in the dim, dusty archive seemed to thicken, pressing down on Michael and Dr. Albright as the guttural growl ripped through the silence. It wasn't just a sound. It was a physical force vibrating through the ancient floorboards, rattling the towering shelves of forgotten texts, and sending a shiver of primal fear straight to their bones. The thumping, which had been a rhythmic pulse, now surged into a frantic, powerful drumming, punctuated by groans that sounded less like settling wood and more like a tormented beast. "What in God's name was that?" Michael gasped, his voice barely a whisper, eyes wide with terror as he instinctively grabbed Dr. Albright's arm. The tremor in her grip was unmistakable, despite her usual calm demeanor. Dr. Albright, her face pale, stared at the floor, then slowly up at the ceiling. Dust motes danced erratically in the faint light filtering through the grimy windows, agitated by the building's violent shuddering. A thin crack snaked its way across the plaster above them, growing visibly longer with each jarring thump. It's coming from below us," she murmured, her voice laced with a mixture of fear and an almost unnatural curiosity. "A sub-basement? This building was never officially listed as having one." The next thump was so violent it sent a cascade of old books tumbling from a nearby shelf, crashing to the floor with a deafening roar that made them both jump. The air filled with the pungent smell of aged paper and something else, a faint metallic tang like old blood or rust, that seemed to cling to the vibrations. "We need to get out of here, Dr. Albright," Michael urged, pulling at her arm. "Whatever that is, it sounds like it's tearing the place apart from the inside." But Dr. Albright seemed rooted to the spot, her gaze fixed on a particular section of the floor, directly beneath where the growling seemed strongest. "No," she said, her voice gaining a surprising firmness. "No, Michael. This is it. This is what Professor Davies was looking for. This is where the true secrets of the fair are buried." As if on cue, a sudden sharp crack echoed through the room. A section of the floorboards, directly beneath where Dr. Albright was staring, splintered inward with a sickening crunch. A cloud of ancient dust and debris erupted, revealing a gaping, jagged hole that plunged into absolute darkness. The growling intensified, now a raw, desperate roar that seemed to claw its way out of the newly opened chasm. A blast of cold, stale air rushed up, carrying with it the metallic scent, now stronger, more acrid. "Look!" Michael exclaimed, pointing a trembling finger. From the depths of the newly exposed abyss, a faint, sickly green light began to pulse, casting an eerie glow on the edges of the broken floorboards. It pulsed in rhythm with the growls like a monstrous subterranean heartbeat. Dr. Albright, her initial fear now mixed with a thrilling sense of discovery, moved cautiously towards the edge of the hole, peering down into the inky blackness. "It's a shaft," she breathed, "or a tunnel. And that light, it's not electrical. Not like anything I've ever seen. It looks like something out of a horror movie," Michael muttered, still hesitant. "We don't know what's down there. It could be unstable or worse. And it could hold the answers," Dr. Albright countered, her eyes gleaming with an almost feverish excitement. "Think, Michael. Davies was obsessed with hidden passages, with what lay beneath the official narrative. He found a map or a reference that led him here. This is it. This is his legacy, and perhaps the key to everything that happened at the fair." She looked at Michael, her expression a mixture of pleading and unwavering determination. "I have to know, Michael. I have to see what's down there. For Davies. For the truth." Michael hesitated, fear warring with his loyalty to Dr. Albright and the growing pull of the mystery. He remembered Davies's frantic notes, his warnings about secrets that never truly die. This felt like walking into a trap, but he also knew that Dr. Albright wouldn't be deterred. "Okay," he finally conceded, albeit reluctantly, "but we go carefully, and we have an exit strategy." They found a sturdy old rope coiled in a forgotten corner of the archive, used perhaps for lifting heavy volumes. Tying one end securely to a thick iron radiator pipe, Dr. Albright carefully lowered herself into the gaping maw, Michael bracing the rope from above. The green light below pulsed brighter as she descended, illuminating glimpses of rough-hewn rock and ancient, crumbling brickwork. The growling was now a constant, low thrum, emanating from deeper within the passage. "It's a tunnel," Dr. Albright's voice echoed up, slightly muffled. "Hand-dug, it looks like. And very old. Much older than the university building itself." Michael followed, his heart pounding in his chest. The descent was chilling. The air grew colder, heavier, saturated with that metallic tang and an earthy, musty smell. The green light, emanating from some unseen source ahead, cast dancing, grotesque shadows on the rough walls. The tunnel twisted and turned, leading them deeper and deeper beneath the university, beneath the city itself. After what felt like an eternity, their feet finally touched solid ground. They were in a narrow, claustrophobic passage. The green light was now clearer, a faint luminescence coming from around a sharp bend ahead. The growling was louder, more distinct, a deep, resonant vibration that seemed to shake the very ground they stood on. "Wait," Michael whispered, pulling Dr. Albright back. "Do you hear that? It's not just growling. There's a rhythm to it." He was right. Beneath the guttural sounds, a faint mechanical whirring could be discerned, a low, consistent hum that was somehow more unsettling than the growling itself. It sounded like an ancient engine, struggling to maintain its function. They crept forward, their footsteps muffled by the thick dust that carpeted the floor. As they rounded the bend, the tunnel opened into a vast, cavernous chamber. It was unlike anything they could have imagined. The chamber was enormous, dwarfing the university archive above. Its ceiling was lost in shadows, but the walls were lined with what appeared to be immense, rusted machinery, colossal gears and pistons frozen in time, coated in a century of grime and cobwebs. The air here was even colder, and the metallic smell was overpowering. And then they saw the source of the green light. In the center of the chamber stood a massive cylindrical apparatus, easily 20 feet tall, made of some dark, unknown metal. It pulsed with that eerie, sickly green luminescence, casting long, distorted shadows that danced like specters across the walls. Wires, thick as a man's arm, snaked from its base, disappearing into the floor and connecting to the dormant machinery around the room. The growling, the mechanical hum, it all emanated from within this central apparatus. It was alive in a way, humming with a low, deep vibration that resonated through the entire chamber. "My God!" Dr. Albright breathed, utterly mesmerized. "What is this place? What is that?" Michael, though terrified, was equally captivated. "It looks like a generator," he whispered, "or some kind of power source. But for what?" They moved closer, drawn by an irresistible force. The green light intensified as they neared the apparatus, revealing intricate etchings on its surface, symbols and diagrams that looked profoundly alien, yet disturbingly familiar. They resembled some of the cryptic illustrations Davies had scrawled in his notes, the ones he'd claimed were beyond human understanding. Around the base of the apparatus, embedded in the floor, were several large, ornate steel plates. On one, half obscured by a century of dust, Michael saw a familiar symbol, the stylized C and K intertwined, the emblem of the Columbian Exposition. But beneath it, another inscription in elegant, looping script was etched into the metal: Project Chimera, a new dawn for humanity. And below that, a date: 1893. Project Chimera, Dr. Albright read aloud, her voice trembling. "Michael, this is it. This is what they were hiding. This is what was beneath the fair." As they stood there, transfixed by the strange machine and its chilling inscription, a low whirring sound began to emanate from the largest of the dormant machines lining the walls. A faint red light blinked on its rusted console. Then another, and another. The entire chamber seemed to stir, as if waking from a long slumber. The growling from the central apparatus intensified, becoming a furious roar. The green light pulsed violently, casting eerie, rapid flashes across the chamber. The metallic tang in the air grew stronger, almost suffocating. And then from the shadows behind the colossal generator, a new sound emerged. A dragging, shuffling noise followed by a heavy thud. It wasn't a growl. It wasn't a whir. It was the distinct sound of something moving in the darkness. Something large. Something that had been disturbed. Michael grabbed Dr. Albright's hand, his own clammy with fear. "We're not alone," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the rising cacophony of the awakening machinery and the monstrous roar. "Whatever's down here, it just woke up." The green light from the central apparatus flared one last time, blindingly bright, before dimming to a steady, menacing glow. And in that brief, intense flash they both saw it. A shadow, impossibly tall and gaunt, detaching itself from the far wall, its form indistinct but undeniably humanoid. It moved with a slow, deliberate gait, its head tilted as if listening, its unseen eyes fixed on them. A low, raspy whisper devoid of humanity seemed to emanate directly from the shadow itself, echoing through the vast chamber. It was a single ancient word, a guttural utterance that chilled them to the bone, a word that seemed to claw its way out of the depths of time and despair. "Davies! Davies!" The single word hung in the air, a spectral echo in the profound silence of the vast, subterranean chamber. Michael, Jessica, David, and Emily were frozen, their breath catching in their throats, the cold seeping deeper into their bones than any external temperature could account for. It wasn't just the chill of the ancient stone. It was the chill of something utterly unnatural, something that defied the very fabric of their reality. The shadow, an amorphous blot against the faint, diffused light from their headlamps, seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy, its formless edges appearing to writhe as if in silent agony or immense power. Jessica felt a jolt of recognition despite the terror that threatened to consume her. "Davies!" she whispered, her voice barely audible, a fragile thread against the oppressive quiet. The name clawed at the edges of her memory, a forgotten fragment of some obscure, historical footnote, but the sheer raw fear of the moment made it impossible to grasp. David, his face pale and drawn, fumbled for his walkie-talkie, his hands shaking so violently he nearly dropped it. Emily pressed herself against Michael, her eyes wide with a primal dread that mirrored his own. The shadow shifted again, its form deepening, stretching. It wasn't moving with any discernible speed, but rather expanding, its presence growing, filling the space with an almost suffocating weight. It didn't physically approach them, but the sheer imminence of it was enough to make their hearts pound like trapped drums. A low, resonant hum began to emanate from its core, a sound that vibrated not just in the air, but directly within their chests, making their teeth ache. It was a sound that spoke of immense, contained energy, of something ancient and restless. "What is that thing?" David choked out, his voice hoarse, his gaze fixed on the expanding darkness. He finally managed to raise the walkie-talkie, but no sound came out, only static. The hum seemed to drown out all other frequencies. Michael, trying to project a calm he didn't feel, took a tentative step forward, then immediately recoiled as the hum intensified. It spoke," he managed, his voice shaky. "It said Davies. Does that name mean anything to anyone?" He looked at Jessica, knowing her historical expertise was their best bet. Jessica was still struggling, her mind racing through countless names, dates, and archival documents. The name felt like a key just out of reach. It's familiar," she stammered. "But I can't, not right now." Her eyes darted back to the shadow, which now seemed to be subtly gesturing, a tendril of darkness extending towards a section of the chamber wall, about 20 feet away. As if in response to the shadow's silent command, a faint, almost imperceptible luminescence began to glow from the ancient stone wall where the shadowy tendril pointed. It was a soft, ethereal light, not enough to illuminate the vast space, but just enough to highlight a particular section of intricately carved hieroglyphs and symbols that had previously blended into the gloom. Seeing the glowing symbols, and the way the shadow specifically indicated them, something clicked in Jessica's mind. The pieces, scattered and obscure, suddenly began to coalesce. Her eyes widened, a gasp escaping her lips. "Elias Davies!" she exclaimed, the name finally breaking through the fog of fear and memory. "Oh my God, it has to be Elias Davies!" Michael looked at her, confused. "Who is Elias Davies, Jessica?" He was an architect, an engineer," Jessica explained, her words tumbling out in a rush, a mix of awe and terror. "He was brilliant but incredibly eccentric. He was one of the original designers considered for the 1893 World's Fair, known for his radical, almost fantastical designs that blended ancient geometries with cutting-edge engineering. But then he vanished. His name was scrubbed from almost all official records, his contributions minimized or attributed to others. It was as if he'd never existed. Emily shivered. Scrubbed from history? Why? That's the mystery, Jessica continued, her gaze fixed on the glowing symbols, then back to the ominous shadow. Whispers persisted, though. Rumors among the more secretive architectural societies. They said he wasn't just working on the World's Fair. They said he was obsessed with something else entirely. Something beneath it. A hidden marvel, they called it. A project that would harness immense, unseen energies. Something too dangerous, too radical for the public, even for the elite committees of the fair. They said he believed the fair itself was merely a facade, a grand illusion to mask a far deeper, more significant undertaking. David whistled low, fear momentarily replaced by a morbid fascination. So this chamber, this is his hidden marvel? It fits the descriptions, Jessica confirmed, her voice filled with a newfound urgency. The scale, the ancient symbols, the sense of power, it all points to Elias Davies. He was rumored to be experimenting with ley lines, with a form of ethereal energy that he believed could be drawn from the very earth itself, amplified by specific geometric configurations. He was trying to create something that would transcend conventional understanding of power and space. As Jessica spoke, the shadow seemed to grow more agitated, its form flickering, the low hum intensifying to a guttural throb that made the very air vibrate. It was as if her words were stirring something within it, confirming its identity, or perhaps its purpose. The tendril of darkness that had pointed to the wall now slowly began to retract, and the shadow itself began to drift, not towards them, but towards the center of the chamber, towards a massive circular pedestal that they had previously only dimly perceived in the gloom. It wants us to look at something, Michael stated, his mind now racing to connect the dots. It's not just a warning, it's a guide. Elias Davies, is he trapped here? Is that him? The thought was terrifying, yet it also offered a strange, unsettling clarity. They weren't just dealing with a random malevolent entity. They were dealing with a specific historical figure, albeit one shrouded in profound mystery. They cautiously followed the shadow's silent lead, their headlamps cutting through the oppressive darkness, their footsteps echoing softly on the cold stone floor. The hum from the shadow grew louder, more insistent, a deep resonant chord that seemed to emanate directly from the very bedrock beneath them. As they approached the circular pedestal, the faint luminescence from the wall seemed to follow them, reflecting off the polished, obsidian-like surface of the pedestal itself. It was not a simple block of stone. It was a complex, multi-layered structure, intricately carved with the same esoteric symbols they had seen on the walls. At its center, embedded deeply within the dark stone, was a device unlike anything any of them had ever witnessed. It was a sphere about 2 feet in diameter, crafted from a dark metallic alloy that seemed to absorb all light, yet simultaneously emitted a faint internal glow. This glow pulsed rhythmically, a soft ethereal blue that seemed to breathe with a life of its own. Intricate clockwork gears, impossibly delicate and precise, were visible beneath a transparent, crystal-like casing that formed the outer shell of the sphere. These gears moved with a slow, deliberate grace, their movements perfectly synchronized, yet seemingly serving no obvious mechanical purpose. Around the sphere, etched into the pedestal, were concentric rings of symbols, each ring slowly rotating in opposition to the next, creating a mesmerizing, hypnotic dance of light and shadow. The device hummed, a higher, sharper note now intertwined with the deep thrum of the shadow. It felt ancient, yet impossibly advanced, a fusion of forgotten knowledge and technology far beyond their comprehension. This was no mere relic, it was a functioning mechanism, a testament to Elias Davies's genius and his dangerous obsession. "What in the world is that?" Emily whispered, her voice filled with a mixture of fear and wonder. Jessica, her eyes wide with a profound understanding and a growing sense of dread, reached out a trembling hand, not quite touching the device. This is it," she breathed. "This is his hidden marvel. This is what he was building. This is what they tried to erase from history." The shadow, now directly behind the pedestal, seemed to coalesce, its form momentarily solidifying, just for an instant, into a vague, gaunt silhouette that might have been a man standing guard. Then it dissolved back into an amorphous blot, but the sense of its presence, its watchful ancient gaze, was more potent than ever. It was as if it had led them here, shown them the truth, and now waited. The blue light from the device pulsed, brighter now, and the rotating rings of symbols accelerated their spin. A subtle vibration began to emanate from the pedestal, traveling up through the floor, making the entire chamber hum in sympathy. The air grew heavy, thick with an unseen energy, and a faint ozone-like scent filled their nostrils. This wasn't merely an artifact, it was a machine, and it was active. And it seemed to be reacting to their presence, or perhaps to the spectral guardian that watched over it. The secret beneath the 1893 World's Fair wasn't just a hidden chamber. It was a living, breathing, humming engine of unimaginable power, waiting for something or someone to awaken it fully. Michael felt it first, a deep vibration resonating not just through the floor beneath his feet, but through the very marrow of his bones. It was a hum that transcended sound, a pressure that filled the chamber, making the air crackle with an unseen energy. Jessica, her hand instinctively flying to her mouth, stared wide-eyed at the pulsating heart of the room. It wasn't a machine made of gears and pistons, not in any conventional sense. It was a colossal crystalline structure, impossibly complex, reaching towards the unseen ceiling. Its surfaces faceted like a monstrous, perfectly cut gemstone. Within its depths, rivers of pure, ethereal light flowed and converged, shifting through every color imaginable before settling on a vibrant, almost painful sapphire blue. The light pulsed in rhythm with the hum, casting dancing shadows that seemed to writhe with a life of their own across the ancient stone walls. The air around it was impossibly warm, yet prickled with a cold, static energy. Michael, ever the scientist, felt an irresistible pull, an urge to understand the physics, the impossible engineering behind it. Jessica, however, felt a primal dread, a warning signal screaming in her gut. This wasn't just a discovery. It was an intrusion, a disturbance of something ancient and immensely powerful. Then the spectral guardian made itself known, not with a sudden appearance, but with a gradual coalescing of the ambient energy. From the shimmering blue light of the engine, a form began to take shape, translucent, spectral, yet undeniably present. It was tall, slender, its features indistinct like a figure seen through heat haze, but its presence was undeniable, radiating an aura of profound sadness, mixed with an unwavering resolve. It didn't speak, not with words, but with a silent, piercing command that echoed directly in their minds. Leave. Now. Michael, don't. Jessica whispered, her voice barely audible above the rising hum. What is that thing? It wants us out. It's incredible, Jessica. Michael breathed, taking a tentative step forward, his eyes glued to the pulsating crystal. This is beyond anything we could have imagined. This could change everything. Change everything for the worse, she retorted, grabbing his arm, her fingers digging into his bicep. Can't you feel it? It's angry, or scared, or both. As if in response to Jessica's fear, the sapphire light intensified, blinding them for a moment. The hum escalated, becoming a deep, resonant thrum that vibrated through their chests, making their teeth ache. The spectral guardian solidified further, its form now distinct enough to reveal flowing, antiquated garments, like something from the late 19th century, yet woven from pure light. Its head tilted, and though no features were clear, they felt an intense, focused gaze upon them. A force unseen but palpable slammed into Michael, sending him stumbling backward, almost knocking him off his feet. It wasn't violent, not exactly, but a firm, undeniable push, a clear demarcation of boundaries. Jessica cried out, pulling him further away from the engine, away from the shimmering entity. As Michael regained his footing, his gaze fell upon a section of the wall that the spectral push had momentarily illuminated with an unnatural brilliance. There, etched into the ancient stone, almost invisible until now, was a series of symbols. Not hieroglyphs, not cuneiform, but a geometric script that seemed to pulse with a faint, internal light, mirroring the energy of the colossal engine. And beneath the symbols, almost as an afterthought, a single name, crudely carved but undeniably clear: Elias Thorne. Elias Thorne. The name reverberated in Michael's mind. He'd scoured every historical record, every obscure pamphlet about the 1893 World's Fair. No Elias Thorne. Not a prominent architect, not an inventor, not even a minor exhibitor. Yet, here was his name inextricably linked to this impossible technology, etched into the very foundation of its hidden chamber. "Who is Elias Thorne?" Jessica whispered, her eyes wide as she traced the glowing symbols with her finger. "And what are these? They look alive." "I don't know," Michael admitted, his voice hoarse with a mixture of awe and growing apprehension. "But if he created this or even knew about it, then he was a ghost in the machine, a forgotten genius far ahead of his time. Or perhaps something else entirely." The spectral guardian, its silent plea now tinged with a desperate urgency, began to ripple, its form flickering as if struggling against an unseen current. The sapphire light of the engine pulsed wildly, now accompanied by sporadic bursts of crimson, like blood blooming in water. The hum was no longer just a hum. It was a rhythmic rising crescendo, a monstrous heartbeat echoing through the cavern. Michael felt a sudden sharp pressure behind his eyes, a dizzying disorientation. He clutched his head, trying to clear the sudden fog. Jessica, equally affected, gasped, her knees threatening to buckle. The air itself seemed to thicken, growing heavy, charged with an almost painful density. It was awakening. The realization hit Michael with the force of a physical blow. The engine, dormant for over a century, was stirring to life, and their presence, their intrusion, seemed to be accelerating its process. But to what end? What was it designed to do? A terrifying thought sparked in Michael's mind, a connection to a long-forgotten theory he dismissed as fantasy. The fair, the White City, a beacon of human ingenuity and progress. What if its true purpose wasn't just to showcase invention, but to power something far grander, far more dangerous? What if this engine wasn't just under the fair, but was meant to influence it or even control it? The very atmosphere of wonder and optimism that had permeated the fair, could it have been an intentional byproduct? A massive energy signature generated by this device? Jessica tugged at his arm again, her face pale, her eyes wide with terror. "Michael, we have to go. Now." But Michael couldn't tear his gaze away from the geometric symbols on the wall, now glowing with an alarming intensity. He felt a strange resonance, a whisper of understanding trying to break through the chaotic noise in his mind. The symbols weren't just decorative, they were instructions, a language, a warning, or perhaps a key. The spectral guardian, with a final shuddering ripple, stretched out a translucent hand towards them, not in aggression, but in a gesture of profound warning, almost pleading. Its form elongated, distorted, as if being pulled into the core of the crystalline structure. For a fleeting moment, Michael thought he saw something in its indistinct features, a profound sorrow, a silent scream. And then, as if ripped apart by an invisible force, its form dissolved, scattering into motes of pure light that were immediately absorbed by the now intensely pulsing engine. The chamber plunged into a momentary, terrifying darkness, broken only by the engine's wild, erratic flashes of sapphire and crimson. The hum became a roar, a sound that threatened to tear the very fabric of reality. Michael and Jessica clung to each other, disoriented, terrified, as the floor beneath them began to tremble violently. The ancient secret beneath the 1893 World's Fair was no longer waiting. It was here, and it was about to unleash something far beyond human comprehension, something that would redefine their understanding of the past, the present, and perhaps the very nature of existence itself. The 1893 World's Fair was no longer waiting, it was here, and it was about to unleash something far beyond human comprehension, something that would redefine their understanding of the past, the present, and perhaps the very nature of existence itself. The first tremors weren't physical but temporal, a subtle fraying at the edges of reality itself. It began with the light. What had been the dazzling, pristine glow of the White City, reflecting off its neoclassical facades, began to subtly, almost imperceptibly, shift. Colors seemed to deepen, then fade, then return with an unnatural vibrancy that made the eyes ache, as if the very spectrum of light was being reordered. Visitors, initially attributing it to tricks of the sun or the sheer scale of the exposition, began to murmur. A collective unease settled over Jackson Park. A whisper carried on the breeze that wasn't quite wind, wasn't quite sound, but a feeling of profound wrongness. Michael, hunched over ancient blueprints in a makeshift office beneath the administration building, felt it first as a prickle at the back of his neck. He'd been tracing a series of forgotten subterranean passages, convinced they held the key to the anomaly he suspected. The gas lamp on his desk flickered, not with the usual sputter of a dying flame, but with a sudden impossible burst of pure white light that made him shield his eyes. When he looked again, the lamp was normal, but the shadows in the room seemed sharper, deeper, as if they had gained a predatory sentience. He dismissed it as fatigue, the strain of weeks spent deciphering cryptic symbols and half-truths. Yet the blueprints on his desk, moments ago a familiar sepia tone, now seemed to possess a faint, shimmering iridescence like oil on water. Above ground, Jessica was inspecting the structural integrity of the manufacturer's and liberal arts building, a monumental edifice that dwarfed all others. She was an engineer, a woman of logic and precise measurements, but as she ran her hand along a colossal plaster column, she felt a subtle vibration, not of the ground, but of the material itself. It was a low hum too deep for human ears but tangible, resonating through her bones. Then she saw it. A tiny crack, hairline thin, snaking its way up the pristine white surface. It wasn't a structural flaw, not in the way she understood them. It pulsed, almost imperceptibly, with a faint internal light. She leaned closer, her brow furrowed in concentration. The crack seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting with a rhythm that defied physics. When she tried to touch it again, her fingers passed through the spot where it had been, as if it had momentarily ceased to exist. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This wasn't fatigue. This wasn't an illusion. This was impossible. David, ever the tenacious journalist, was weaving through the throngs near the Grand Basin, notebook in hand, seeking out human interest stories. He'd initially been capturing the awe and wonder of the fair's opening days, but the narrative was shifting. He'd interviewed a woman, Sarah, who swore she'd seen her own reflection in the water of the basin, only her reflection was wearing clothes from a century earlier. Then an elderly gentleman, Thomas, recounted seeing the Ferris wheel, in mid-rotation, briefly dissolve into a swirling vortex of light before snapping back into perfect clarity. David scribbled furiously, his journalistic skepticism warring with a growing sense of profound unease. These weren't isolated incidents. The anecdotes were piling up, each more bizarre than the last. People were whispering about ghosts in the gears, and time-slipping. He knew a story when he heard one, and this was bigger than anything he'd ever imagined. This wasn't just a fair. It was a stage for something utterly unprecedented. Emily, with her artistic sensibilities and an almost preternatural intuition, felt the shift most acutely. She was sketching the intricate details of the Palace of Fine Arts when the world around her seemed to lose its coherence. The sounds of the crowd, the distant music, the clatter of horse-drawn carriages, it all became muffled, distant, as if she were suddenly submerged underwater. A chill unlike any cold she had ever known seeped into her bones, a cold that felt ancient and vast. When she looked up, the palace's majestic dome seemed to ripple, its solid stone briefly appearing as if it were made of liquid light. For a fleeting second, she saw not the bustling crowds of 1893, but a desolate landscape, overgrown and crumbling, with familiar structures half buried under sand and time. A primal scream caught in her throat. She closed her eyes tightly, squeezing them until colors burst behind her eyelids. When she opened them again, the world was back to normal, but the image of that future ruin was burned into her mind, a terrifying premonition. The anomalies began to escalate, no longer subtle whispers but undeniable shouts. A section of the Columbian Guard, marching in perfect formation, briefly vanished from sight, only to reappear a few paces forward, their expressions bewildered. Exhibits within the various buildings would flicker, their contents momentarily replaced by impossible objects, strange, glowing mechanisms or ancient, petrified artifacts that defied any known archaeological record. The very air around the fairgrounds began to hum with an almost audible frequency, a low thrum that vibrated through the ground, through the buildings, through the very bodies of the visitors. The White City, once a symbol of human ingenuity and progress, began to feel less like an architectural marvel and more like a skin, a fragile veneer stretched taut over something monstrous and alive. The plaster walls seemed to breathe, the marble floors pulsed with a faint, internal luminescence. The grandeur began to feel like a trap, the beauty a seductive illusion. Panic, like a contagious disease, began to spread. Not yet a stampede, but a pervasive growing dread. People clutched their loved ones, their eyes darting around, trying to make sense of a world that was rapidly losing its sense. Michael, his fatigue forgotten, realized the flickering lamp and the shimmering blueprints were not isolated incidents. He raced through the subterranean passages, the ancient maps now glowing faintly in his hands, guiding him. He knew with a certainty that chilled him to the core that the unleashing wasn't some abstract concept. It was happening now. The passages grew colder, the air thick with the scent of ozone and something else, something metallic and ancient, like deep earth mixed with forgotten magic. He could hear a faint, rhythmic thrumming, growing louder with every step, coming from deeper within the earth, directly beneath the heart of the fair. Jessica, abandoning her inspection, followed the pulsating crack that had reappeared, now wider, more pronounced, weeping a thin phosphorescent liquid. It led her away from the main thoroughfares, into a less frequented pavilion, one dedicated to future technologies. Inside, the crack widened into a gaping fissure in the wall, revealing not the expected structural void, but a swirling vortex of impossible colors and shifting light. The hum she'd felt earlier was deafening here, a resonant frequency that threatened to shatter her eardrums. She saw glimpses within the vortex, fleeting images of alien landscapes, of impossible constructions, of other beings that defied description. Her scientific mind screamed for explanation, but there was none, only awe and terror. David, having collected enough eyewitness accounts to fill a dozen newspapers, knew he needed to find the source. He followed the growing murmur of terrified whispers, the panicked pointing, the sheer, unadulterated fear that now permeated the air. The focal point seemed to be the central lagoon, directly beneath the colossal statue of the Republic. The water, usually calm and reflecting the grandeur of the surrounding buildings, was now churning, not with waves, but with an internal luminescence, a deep emerald glow that pulsed from beneath the surface. He saw people backing away, their faces pale with horror, as the water began to rise, defying gravity, forming a shimmering ethereal column that reached towards the heavens. Emily, still reeling from her vision, found herself drawn, almost hypnotically, to the same central lagoon. The ancient chill intensified, radiating from the emerald column of water. She saw not just the terror on the faces of the onlookers, but a profound sadness, a sense of irreparable loss. As the column of water pulsed and grew, she felt a connection, a resonance with something vast and ancient stirring beneath the fair. It was a consciousness, not human, not animal, but something primordial, something that had been slumbering for millennia, now awakening. As their paths converged, drawn by the escalating chaos and the undeniable gravitational pull of the anomaly, Michael burst forth from a hidden access tunnel near the lagoon, his face streaked with dust, his eyes wide with a terrifying realization. Jessica stumbled out of the Future Technologies pavilion, her hands trembling, her mind reeling from the impossible sights she had witnessed. David pushed through the thinning crowd, his camera forgotten, his journalistic detachment shattered by the sheer, unadulterated reality of the impossible. And Emily stood transfixed, her intuition screaming a warning that transcended mere words. The emerald column of water, now incandescent, pulsed violently. From its depths, a low, resonant groan began to emanate, a sound that seemed to tear at the fabric of the air itself. The magnificent plaster buildings surrounding the lagoon began to visibly tremble, their pristine white surfaces cracking and flaking, revealing not brick or steel beneath, but a faint organic luminescence like veins beneath skin. The white city was not crumbling, it was shedding its disguise. And then from within the heart of the shimmering column, something began to emerge. It wasn't solid, not entirely. It was a distortion, a ripple in the air, a shadow that seemed to drink the light, yet pulsed with an inner, terrible brilliance. It was vast, ancient, and utterly alien. The air grew heavy, thick with an unbearable pressure, as if the very atmosphere itself was trying to hold back an impossible truth. The dream of the White City was over. The nightmare beneath had begun its ascent, and Michael, Jessica, David, and Emily, along with thousands of unsuspecting visitors, were about to bear witness to the raw, unadulterated manifestation of a secret that had slept for eons, now awakening to consume the present and rewrite the future. A low, resonant hum began, a sound so deep it wasn't heard as much as it was felt, vibrating through the very soles of shoes, up through the foundations of the pristine white city. It started subtly, an almost imperceptible tremor that made the gaslights in the electricity building flicker just for a moment, and the water in the grand basin ripple with an unnatural agitation, not from the wind but from beneath. Michael, standing near the grand entrance to the machinery hall, felt at first as a cold shiver racing down his spine, a familiar dread that echoed the touch of the strange metal in the archives. The ground beneath his feet seemed to shift, a barely noticeable tremor that quickly intensified. making the enormous engines inside the hall vibrate with a disharmonious rattle. He gripped the railing, his eyes scanning the faces of the nearby visitors, seeing their initial confusion mirrored in his own. Across the fair, near the graceful arches of the women's building, Jessica felt a sudden sharp jolt, not just physical, but a deep psychic resonance, a whisper of immense ancient power that slammed into her mind. She clutched her head, her vision momentarily blurring as if the very air around her had solidified into a heavy, oppressive presence. The genteel chatter and laughter around her seemed to warp, becoming distorted, distant. A metallic tang like ozone mixed with something indescribably old filled her nostrils. David and Emily stood mesmerized by the intricate details of the manufacturers and liberal arts building, the largest structure ever built. They had been tracing the lines of its ornate plasterwork when the tremor struck. At first, they thought it was the rumble of a passing train. But then, with a sickening crack, a hairline fracture appeared above their heads, spiderwebbing across the pristine white facade. As they watched, horrified, the intricate, almost alien symbols they had seen in the archives, seemingly carved into the building's very structure, began to subtly shift, to move, their edges blurring, their patterns rearranging themselves in a silent, terrifying dance. The hum intensified, growing into a guttural thrumming that resonated from deep within the earth, a sound that bypassed the ears and settled directly in the chest, squeezing the breath from lungs. The delicate Venetian gondolas in the Grand Basin began to rock violently, their oarsmen struggling against an invisible current that churned the water into frothing peaks. Then from beneath the surface an eerie phosphorescent light began to bloom, a cold cerulean glow that pulsed with the rhythm of the deepening hum. Confusion rippled through the thousands of visitors. Laughter died. Whispers turned to gasps. Children, sensing the mounting dread, began to cry, clinging to their parents. The carefully constructed illusion of progress and enlightenment began to fray at the edges, revealing a primal fear beneath. Panic was a slow-burning fuse, just waiting for the spark. Michael pushed through the bewildered crowd, his gaze fixed on the Grand Basin, the source of the growing light and sound. He knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that whatever he had touched, whatever Jessica had felt, whatever David and Emily had seen, was now manifesting. This was it. The secret. Jessica, fighting through the disorientation, found herself drawn towards the light, an irresistible pull guiding her through the now frenzied throng. Every step closer amplified the psychic assault, a torrent of images and sensations flooding her mind. Vast, empty spaces, impossible geometries, and a cold, indifferent intelligence that had slept for eons. It was not malicious, not evil in a human sense, but utterly, terrifyingly alien. David and Emily, their hands clasped tight, watched in horror as the cracks on the manufacturer's building deepened, stretching across its immense surface like a skeletal hand. The moving symbols seemed to glow with a faint, internal light, pulsing in sync with the cerulean glow from the basin. They saw other buildings around the basin begin to subtly distort, their perfect neoclassical lines blurring, their white facades appearing to ripple as if seen through heat haze, but it was not heat. It was as if the very fabric of reality was being stretched and warped. Then the spark ignited the fuse. A deafening, grinding roar erupted from the Grand Basin, a sound that seemed to tear at the fabric of the air itself. The water, now glowing with an incandescent, unearthly brilliance, began to recede, not draining, but somehow compressing, forming a swirling vortex-like aperture. From its depths, something began to rise. It wasn't a creature in any recognizable form. It was a shimmering, impossible geometry, a structure of pure, ancient energy and unknown, obsidian-like material. It pulsed with the same cold dread Michael had felt, casting impossible, shifting shadows across the panicked faces of the crowd. Its form defied Euclidean logic, appearing to be both solid and ethereal, both here and nowhere. Angles shifted where no angle should be, surfaces twisted into impossible curves. It expanded slowly, majestically, yet with an unsettling speed, dwarfing the surrounding buildings, its apex reaching towards the heavens. A wave of pure, unadulterated terror washed over the fair. Screams tore through the air as people stumbled, fell, and trampled each other in a desperate, animalistic flight. The grandeur of the White City dissolved into a maelstrom of fear and chaos. Michael found himself paralyzed, staring at the rising anomaly. He could feel its immense power, a gnawing emptiness that threatened to consume everything. He saw Jessica, just a few yards from the basin's edge, her hands still pressed to her temples, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and a terrifying understanding. He saw David and Emily, huddled together, pointing up at the manufacturer's building where the symbols now glowed with an aggressive, vibrant light, mirroring the impossible structure rising from the basin. The air itself became heavy, dense, as if time and space were being stretched taut. People fell to their knees, disoriented, some screaming incoherently, others staring in horrified awe at the manifesting entity. It was beautiful in its terrifying impossibility, a silent cosmic scream made manifest. The promise of progress, of human ingenuity, that the fair had so proudly proclaimed, was being consumed, overshadowed by an ancient alien truth. As the impossible structure continued its ascent, a ripple of distortion spread outward from its core. For a fleeting, horrifying moment, Michael saw the familiar faces of the crowd around him flicker, their turn-of-the-century attire momentarily replaced by something primal, ancient, then by something futuristic, metallic, before snapping back to the present. The anomaly wasn't just physical. It was bending reality itself. Jessica let out a choked cry, not of pain, but of profound existential horror. She saw it all, the eons of slumber, the awakening, the cold, calculating intent. This wasn't just an event, it was a fundamental shift, a rewriting of the very fabric of existence. The secret beneath the 1893 World's Fair wasn't merely a hidden chamber or a forgotten creature. It was a force, an intelligence beyond human comprehension, and it was now fully awake, ready to claim its due. And Michael, Jessica, David, and Emily, along with thousands of unsuspecting visitors, were trapped at the epicenter of its grand, terrifying rebirth. The deep, resonant hum began subtly, a vibration felt more in the bones than heard by the ear. It rippled outwards from beneath the Palace of Fine Arts, a silent tremor that preceded the symphony of chaos. The gas lamps, which usually cast a warm, inviting glow, flickered erratically, their flames dancing with an unnatural frenzy before sputtering to a sickly greenish hue. Then the newly installed electric lights, the crowning glory of the White City, began to fail. Not a blackout, not a sudden darkness, but a slow, agonizing dimming, as if the very energy that powered them was being siphoned away, leaving behind a pallid, dying light that painted the monumental structures in shades of grotesque twilight. A collective murmur rose from the throngs of visitors, a ripple of confusion that quickly morphed into unease. The festive chatter, the joyous shouts, the distant strains of orchestral music from the bandstands, all began to distort. Voices became muffled, then stretched and warped, like sound traveling through water. The music twisted into discordant wails, then into a low guttural thrum that vibrated deep within the chest, a sound that was profoundly wrong. Michael felt the shift first in the air, a sudden inexplicable drop in temperature, followed by a metallic tang on his tongue. He looked at Jessica, her eyes wide with a dawning horror that mirrored his own. Around them, people started clutching their heads, their expressions shifting from bewilderment to outright panic. A woman near them screamed, a high piercing sound that cut through the distorted ambient noise, pointing a trembling finger at the Grand Basin. The water, usually a placid mirror reflecting the majestic buildings, now seemed to churn from within, not with waves, but with slow, deliberate undulations, as if a colossal unseen creature was stirring beneath its surface. The reflections on the water's surface elongated, stretched, and twisted, showing not the elegant facades of the fair, but fleeting, monstrous caricatures. David, who moments before had been staring at the now flickering electric lights with a predatory gleam, suddenly stumbled back, a look of pure terror etched on his face. He clutched his head, muttering about a buzzing, a ringing, a voice that wasn't there. Emily, however, stood unnervingly still, her eyes glazed over, a faint, almost translucent glow emanating from the symbols tattooed on her arm. She swayed, her lips moving silently, as if in conversation with an invisible entity. The colossal Ferris wheel, once a beacon of progress, shuddered to a halt, its mechanical groan echoing like a dying beast. Its many lights, moments ago a dazzling spectacle, sputtered into darkness, leaving it a skeletal silhouette against the deepening, unnatural gloom. Then, as if responding to an unseen command, the massive structure began to slowly, agonizingly, turn backward, its metal framework groaning in protest, defying all logic and engineering. Panic erupted, a raw, primal wave that swept through the crowds. People screamed, pushing and shoving, desperate to escape the rapidly deteriorating reality. But escape was not an option. The meticulously planned pathways of the White City, designed for easy flow, now seemed to shift and contort. Archways appeared to narrow, corridors lengthened, and familiar landmarks vanished behind shimmering distortions in the air. It was as if the very fabric of space was being stretched and warped by an invisible hand. Shadows, usually predictable and tethered to their sources, detached themselves, lengthening and twisting into grotesque, ephemeral shapes that danced at the periphery of vision. They writhed across the pristine white walls of the buildings, forming fleeting, nightmarish tableaus that flickered into existence then vanished. The air grew thick, heavy with an oppressive presence, a palpable weight that pressed down on every soul, stealing breath and crushing hope. Michael tried to grab Jessica's hand, his mind racing, trying to find a logical explanation for the impossible. But logic had abandoned the fair. This wasn't a mechanical failure, nor an earthquake, nor a natural disaster. This was something else, something ancient and malevolent, finally stretching its limbs. He remembered the symbols, the energy, the warnings in the forgotten texts. It wasn't just awake, it was active. It was asserting its will. Jessica, ever practical, pulled at his arm. "We have to get out. Find an exit." But as she spoke, a seemingly solid wall of shimmering iridescent light materialized across the main thoroughfare, blocking their path. It pulsated with a low rhythmic hum, a barrier composed of pure, concentrated energy, humming with the same alien resonance they had felt underground. Other visitors, attempting to rush through, recoiled with screams of pain as if hitting an invisible force field. The electrical energy of the fair, once a sign of human mastery, was now being wielded against them. David, his face ashen, stumbled towards a nearby exhibit, a display of newfangled electrical devices. As he reached out, a jolt of pure force threw him back, sending him sprawling. His eyes were wide with terror, but also a twisted fascination. It's all connected," he gasped. "The power, it's drawing it all in." He saw it, not just the danger, but the sheer, unfathomable magnitude of the force at play, a power that dwarfed his wildest ambitions. Emily finally spoke, her voice a whisper, yet it cut through the cacophony of fear and distortion, clear and resonant. "It's hungry," she breathed, her eyes now wide open, but staring past them into some unseen dimension. "It's claiming its due. Not just the energy, but the essence." Her gaze swept across the terrified faces of the fairgoers. "It's taking everything. It's making this place its own." Suddenly, the ground beneath their feet began to ripple, not just tremble, but visibly undulate, like a taut sheet in a strong wind. The magnificent white buildings, once symbols of purity and grandeur, began to crack, not from structural stress, but from within, as if the stone itself was alive and shedding its skin. Veins of glowing, sickly green light pulsed beneath the surface of the marble, spreading like a parasitic infection. From the depths of the grand basin, a column of water erupted, not a fountain, but a solid black mass of liquid that coiled and writhed like a living serpent, reaching for the sky. It pulsed with the same unnatural light that now permeated the fair, and within its churning depths fleeting, indistinct shapes seemed to coalesce, forms that were utterly alien, yet disturbingly familiar, like twisted reflections of human anatomy. The air grew heavy with a new sound, a collective internal groan that seemed to emanate from the very ground, from the buildings, from the distorted sounds of the fair. It was a sound of immense power, of ancient awakening, of a colossal entity finally stretching its consciousness across the physical plane. It wasn't just affecting the fair, it was becoming the fair. It was remaking the White City in its own terrifying image. Michael felt a searing pain in his head, 1,000 disjointed thoughts, fears, and memories of the surrounding crowd suddenly flooding his mind. Not his own, but alien, overwhelming. It was as if the entity was not just influencing the physical world, but directly interfacing with the collective consciousness of every person present, harvesting their fear, their confusion, their despair. Jessica screamed as a section of the exhibition hall's wall behind them suddenly crumbled inward, not with a crash, but with a silent, implosive sigh, revealing not the interior of the hall, but a swirling vortex of shadow and crackling green light. It was a doorway to something unimaginable, and the vortex began to exert a powerful, inexorable pull, drawing debris, then smaller objects, then screaming fairgoers towards its terrifying maw. The ground beneath them bucked violently, throwing them off their feet. Emily cried out, a sound of pure anguish, as the symbols on her arm flared with intense light, burning through her skin. She was a conduit, a connection, and the entity was using her. channeling its immense destructive power through her very being. The fair, the grand celebration of human ingenuity, was now a chaotic, nightmarish landscape, its wonders twisted into instruments of terror. The entity was not merely present, it was manifesting, consuming the very essence of the fair, transforming it into a living, breathing, monstrous extension of itself. And Michael, Jessica, David, and Emily, along with thousands of unsuspecting visitors, were trapped at the epicenter of its grand, terrifying rebirth, now fully aware that the dew it sought was not just energy, but the very reality of their world. The very air around them began to tear, not with a sound, but with an impossible visual ripple that warped the magnificent structures of the White City. The Grand Peristyle, a monument to human ingenuity, shimmered like a heat haze, its marble columns elongating and contracting in a sickening dance. Colors bled from their boundaries, the pristine white of the fairgrounds dissolving into a kaleidoscope of impossible hues, vibrant and painful to the eye. The sky above, moments ago a clear Chicago blue, now pulsed with an aurora borealis of unnatural light, casting grotesque, shifting shadows that defied the sun's position. Panic, raw and guttural, erupted. Thousands of visitors who had moments before marveled at the wonders of the age, now screamed in terror as the ground beneath their feet seemed to undulate, threatening to swallow them whole. The carefully manicured gardens twisted into thorny, grasping tendrils. The serene lagoon churned, its waters turning opaque and viscous, reflecting not the sky, but a swirling vortex of deep, ancient darkness. Michael felt a primal scream rise in his throat, but no sound escaped. His voice, like all others, was swallowed by the expanding distortion, reduced to a whisper in a deafening silence. It was as if the world was being pulled apart at its seams, not by an explosion, but by an internal, agonizing unraveling. He grabbed Jessica's hand, his fingers digging into her palm as he tried to ground himself in the rapidly dissolving present. David, his face a mask of grim determination, pulled Emily close, shielding her from the horrifying spectacle, though her eyes were wide, fixed on something unseen, something beyond the immediate chaos. The architectural marvels began to breathe. The Palace of Fine Arts, with its classical grandeur, seemed to inhale, its walls expanding and contracting, the intricate carvings on its facade twisting into leering, monstrous visages. The sounds of the fair, the distant chug of engines, the murmur of conversations, the faint strains of an orchestra, became a dissonant symphony, stretched and compressed, overlapping in impossible ways until they were just a cacophony of agony. It's trying to establish itself, Michael finally managed to rasp, his voice hoarse, the words barely audible even to himself. It's not just taking energy, it's trying to rewrite everything, to make this place its own reality, a reality where it was never disturbed, never buried. Jessica, her eyes darting frantically, processing the impossible data points assaulting her senses, nodded slowly. The dew isn't just a payment, it's a reclamation. It wants to reclaim its place in the timeline, to assert its primacy. This fair, this pinnacle of human progress. It's an affront, a monument built on its forgotten grave. The realization was a cold, chilling hand clenching around Michael's heart. The entity wasn't just a threat, it was a cosmic correction. It wasn't seeking to destroy them out of malice, but out of a desperate, ancient need to restore itself, to mend a wound inflicted upon it by a world that dared to forget. Suddenly, Emily cried out, a sharp, piercing sound that somehow cut through the distorted silence. She pointed a trembling finger towards the colossal Ferris wheel, which now spun erratically, its massive gondolas blurring into streaks of light and shadow. But it wasn't the wheel she was pointing at. It was beneath it, where the ground should have been solid. A crack, glowing with an internal sickly green light, was rapidly spreading, like a cancerous vein across the earth. The conduit, Jessica whispered, her voice laced with a terrifying certainty. The central point, Tesla's work. It wasn't just about harnessing power. He was trying to understand the nature of this energy, wasn't he? To replicate it, to control it. What if he also found a way to contain it? Or, more dangerously, to amplify it? An image flashed in Michael's mind. The diagrams, the scattered notes, the cryptic references to a resonant frequency, and a temporal anchor. Tesla, in his genius, might have been the first to truly grasp the entity's presence, not just as a power source, but as a disruptive force. He might have built something not to unleash it, but to stabilize it, to prevent exactly this kind of reality collapse. We have to get to the main power nexus, Michael declared, his voice gaining a desperate urgency. "The place where everything converges. If there's a way to reverse this, to re-establish the original reality, it has to be there. And Emily, you led us to the opening beneath the Ferris wheel before. It's a direct path, isn't it?" Emily, still trembling, nodded, her eyes wide with a fear that seemed to transcend the immediate chaos. "It's pulling. Like a magnet. It wants to pull everything back to how it was." Her words were fragmented, but the implication was terrifying. The entity wasn't merely destroying, it was undoing. David, ever the pragmatist, assessed the situation. "The crowds are stampeding. The structures are unstable. How do we even get close?" As if in answer, a section of the Palace of Mechanic Arts, directly in their path, groaned loudly, its metal framework twisting like taffy before collapsing inward with a shriek of tortured steel and shattering glass. The ground buckled, sending a wave of dust and debris over them. They were running out of time and options. "We go through," Jessica stated, her jaw set. "We use what we know. The underground tunnels. The service passages. They're still there under the chaos. They were built to connect everything, including the power conduits. If we can get into the service network, we might have a chance to bypass the worst of this." The idea was audacious, terrifying, but it was their only hope. The fairgrounds above were a maelstrom of dissolving reality, but beneath, the hidden veins of the White City might still offer a semblance of structure. "The entrance we used before," Michael said, recalling their first foray into the hidden depths. "Near the administration building. It might still be accessible." They began to move, a desperate quartet navigating a world that was actively trying to erase itself. The ground beneath their feet felt spongy, then solid, then as if it were made of shifting sand. Reflections in puddles showed not their own faces, but fleeting glimpses of ghostly figures in turn-of-the-century attire, their eyes wide with ancient terror. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of ozone and something else, something ancient and earthy, like disturbed soil from a forgotten grave. People around them were not just fleeing, some were simply vanishing. One moment, a woman was screaming, clutching her child. The next, she was gone, leaving only the faint echo of her cry. It wasn't a physical disappearance, but an erasure, as if she had never been. The entity was not merely destroying, it was unmaking history, one person, one structure, one moment at a time. David took the lead, his powerful frame shouldering aside debris and, at times, panicked individuals who seemed lost in a waking nightmare. He moved with a focused intensity, his eyes scanning for any hint of stability, any path through the chaos. Emily clung to his hand, her small body trembling, but her gaze remained fixed, almost drawn towards the epicenter of the disturbance. She was a divining rod, sensing the entity's presence, its pull, its ancient hunger. Jessica, her mind racing, tried to make sense of the energy fluctuations. Her device, usually a reliable source of data, was now spitting out gibberish, overwhelmed by the sheer raw power radiating from the widening fissure beneath the Ferris wheel. Yet she noticed a pattern within the chaos. Certain frequencies, certain energy signatures, seemed to coalesce around specific points, like eddies in a raging river. These were the nodes, the conduits, the very arteries of the fair's power system. If they could follow them, they might reach the heart of the problem. They reached the approximate location of the old service entrance. The elegant administration building was now a grotesque caricature of its former self, its dome pulsating with an inner light, its windows like vacant, staring eyes. A section of its foundation had buckled, revealing a gaping maw of darkness. This was it. "Down here," Michael urged, pointing to the dark opening. The air that wafted up from within was cold, devoid of the volatile energy that raged above. It was a temporary reprieve, a plunge into a different kind of unknown. They scrambled down into the darkness, the sounds of the collapsing fair fading to a muffled roar above them. The tunnel was damp, the air thick with the smell of earth and stale water. It was blessedly stable, insulated from the reality-bending chaos that consumed the surface. Jessica quickly activated a small battery-powered lamp, its beam cutting a path through the oppressive gloom. "We need to follow the main power lines," she said, her voice echoing. "They'll lead us to the central distribution hub. That's where Tesla's original modifications would have been integrated. That's where the temporal anchor might be." As they moved deeper, the tunnels began to change. The rough-hewn earth gave way to reinforced concrete, then to older brick-lined passages that predated the fair itself. The air grew colder, and a faint rhythmic hum began to resonate through the very stones. It was the sound of colossal power, barely contained. They followed the hum, deeper and deeper, through forgotten corridors and past rusting machinery. The tunnels became narrower, the ceiling lower, forcing them to stoop. The hum intensified, vibrating in their bones, a low guttural thrum that was both mechanical and organic. Finally, the tunnel opened into a vast circular chamber, its ceiling lost in shadow. In the center, a colossal, intricate device pulsed with the same sickly green light Emily had seen above. It was unlike anything Michael had ever seen in any historical record. It was a fusion of advanced engineering and something far older, far more alien. Coils of copper, massive and gleaming, spiraled around a central crystal, a multifaceted gem that radiated an oppressive energy. Ancient symbols, not of any known human language, were etched into the chamber walls around it, glowing faintly in response to the device's pulse. This was it, the heart of the matter, the place where the entity had been trapped, contained, or perhaps nurtured. And now it was fully awake, fully active. The air in the chamber crackled, not with electricity, but with pure, unadulterated reality distortion. The walls shimmered, the shadows danced with impossible forms, and the very concept of up and down seemed to lose its meaning. Michael stared at the device, a terrible understanding dawning on him. This wasn't just a power conduit. It was a gateway, a bridge, and it was clearly designed to allow the entity to fully manifest, to reclaim its due by overriding their world entirely. The temporal anchor wasn't there to stabilize. It was there to shift the timeline, and they were standing at the very precipice of that shift. The hum intensified, rising in pitch, a deafening crescendo that threatened to shatter their very minds. The central crystal flared, its green light expanding, consuming the chamber, then the tunnel, then Michael knew the entire fair and ultimately their world. He knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that the entity was no longer just reaching for its due. It was taking it, and they were directly in its path. The air itself seemed to compress, squeezing the breath from Michael's lungs. The rumbling intensified, no longer a distant tremor but a violent shudder that threatened to tear the earth apart. From the deepest recess of the tunnel, a lightless void began to unfurl, not a shadow, but an absence of light so profound it seemed to pull the surrounding darkness into itself. It pulsed, a monstrous, silent heart, expanding with terrifying speed. "Michael! It's drawing the power!" David yelled, his voice strained, barely audible over the growing roar. "The main conduits. It's siphoning it directly from the central dynamo room. It's like it's tasting the entire fair's lifeblood." Michael's mind raced, a desperate clarity piercing through the terror. Emily's words about the ley lines, David's knowledge of the fair's intricate power grid, the entity's insatiable hunger for ambition and ingenuity, it all clicked into place. "It's not just feeding, David," Michael gasped, the words catching in his throat. "It's consuming the very heart of the fair. It's using these ancient pathways, these tunnels, as its veins to pull the energy from the generators, from the very ambition that birthed this place." The void pulsed faster, an invisible wave of pure dread washing over them. Loose earth and debris began to lift, swirling in chaotic eddies around the expanding darkness. It was a maw, a hungry, ancient entity devouring the very fabric of reality, and they were caught in its throat. "We have to stop it," David shouted, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and engineering urgency. "But how? We can't just shut down the entire fair. It's too big, too complex." "We don't shut it down," Michael countered, a wild idea forming. "We overload it, turn its appetite against itself." "What's the main conduit, the primary feed from the central dynamo room? The one that carries the most power?" David's eyes darted around, his gaze falling on a massive, reinforced conduit running along the tunnel ceiling, thicker than any other, humming with barely contained energy. "That one. It's the primary artery. But if we disrupt it, the surge would be catastrophic. It could take out the entire system, Michael. The fair would go dark. Better dark than devoured." Michael yelled, pushing past his fear. "Is there a way to cut it or divert it? To send a surge it can't handle? There's an emergency cutoff valve for the steam lines that power the generators, a failsafe for surge protection," David explained, thinking aloud, his engineering mind kicking into overdrive even under duress. "If we initiate a complete system purge and then reverse the current at the main junction, it might flood that conduit with raw, uncontrolled energy. It'll blow the system, Michael, but it'll create a chaotic feedback. Too much, too fast, too unstable for it to absorb. Do it. Michael commanded, his voice firm, resolute. Show me the way. They scrambled, navigating the crumbling tunnel. The air growing thick and heavy, like trying to move through molasses. The entity's presence was suffocating, a silent scream that pressed in on their minds. The void continued to expand, tendrils of shadow, not quite solid, lashing out, tearing at the very air around them, seeming to test their resolve. Michael felt a cold, invasive dread tried to burrow into his thoughts, whispering of futility, of inevitable consumption. He fought it, focusing on David, on the conduit, on the desperate flickering hope that they could actually do this. David pointed to a heavily armored junction box embedded in the tunnel wall, sparks already dancing around its frayed connections. There. The primary junction. I have to reroute the failsafe circuit, then engage the purge valve. As they approached, the entity's influence intensified. Loose rocks pelted them from the ceiling. A section of the tunnel wall groaned, then collapsed with a deafening roar, nearly burying them. Michael shielded David, pushing him forward. Go. I'll keep it off you. He grabbed a heavy metal pipe, a desperate, futile weapon against an ethereal horror, but it gave him something to focus on. The void pulsed closer, a chilling cold radiating from its depths. Michael could feel his own energy being drawn, a subtle drain on his vitality, like a slow, deliberate bleeding. He gritted his teeth, forcing the fear down. David worked with a frantic, almost manic energy, his hands flying over the junction box, twisting wires, bypassing safety mechanisms, sweat pouring down his face. The air crackled with a malevolent energy, the entity seeming to know their intent. Its shadowy tendrils solidified momentarily, like grasping claws, tearing at the ground near David's feet. Almost there. David grunted, his breath ragged. He slammed a heavy lever down. A thunderous crack echoed through the tunnel, followed by a blinding flash of blue-white light that seared Michael's eyes. A wave of raw, screaming energy surged through the conduit, not the steady hum it craved, but a chaotic, untamed torrent. It was electricity unleashed, pure and violent. The void shrieked, a soundless scream that vibrated in Michael's bones, a primal agony. It recoiled violently, convulsing as the uncontrolled power ravaged its ethereal form. The lightless maw began to shrink, folding in on itself, struggling against the very force it had sought to consume. The shadowy tendrils lashed out once more, but this time they were not grasping, but flailing in desperation, dissolving into wisps of vapor as the chaotic energy pulsed through the conduit. The ground beneath them bucked and roared, as if the earth itself was struggling against the entity's withdrawal. The conduit glowed red-hot, then burst, showering sparks and molten metal, but the surge had done its work. The entity was being torn apart by the very power it had tried to wield. Then, with a final shuddering gasp, the void imploded, leaving behind only an echoing silence and the acrid smell of ozone. The ground settled, the rumbling ceased. The tunnel was still but scarred, the conduits melted, the earth scorched. The air, though still heavy, no longer held that suffocating, draining pressure. Michael and David stood there, trembling, gasping for breath, their bodies aching, their minds reeling. The immediate danger was past, but the air still thrummed with residual energy, a phantom echo of the battle fought in the dark. It's gone, David whispered, leaning against the scorched wall, his face pale, his hands shaking uncontrollably. Michael nodded, unable to speak, his throat tight with exhaustion and a lingering terror. He knew it wasn't truly gone, not destroyed. Such ancient hunger merely retreated, banished back to the shadows it emerged from, waiting for another time, another opportunity. They stumbled back, retracing their steps through the damaged tunnels, the silence now more unnerving than the earlier roar. They emerged, blinking, into the muted light of the service corridor just as the first glimmer of dawn touched the eastern sky. Above, the fair was still there, a silhouette against the coming light, its grand structures reaching for the heavens. But something was different. The grand generators, the heart of the fair, would be silent for a time. The lights of the exposition would dim, perhaps for days, a small price for its very survival. The world would attribute it to a massive electrical malfunction, a catastrophic system failure in the cutting-edge technology of the age. No one would ever know the true nature of the battle fought beneath the dazzling spectacle, the ancient entity that had nearly consumed the very spirit of human progress. Michael looked at David and David looked back, a shared, unspoken understanding passing between them. They had faced something beyond comprehension, something that defied all logic and reason. They had glimpsed the abyss, and for a fleeting moment, they had pushed it back. Emily had been right all along, though she would never know the full extent of her theory. The disappearances, the anomalies, the ley lines. They were all threads in a tapestry of a deeper, darker reality. The fair, a monument to human genius, had nearly been its tomb. A grand feast for an entity that fed on the very essence of ambition. The entity was contained, perhaps even banished for now. But Michael knew it wasn't destroyed. Such hunger, such ancient malevolence, merely retreated, waiting for the next great outpouring of human ambition, the next grand stage of ingenuity to draw it forth. The world would continue to build, to innovate, to strive for greatness, unknowingly laying out a banquet for the unseen. And beneath the dazzling lights and grand promises, the true secret of the 1893 World's Fair would forever remain. A chilling whisper in the dark, known only to two men who had glimpsed the abyss and survived, forever haunted by the knowledge that some secrets are best left undisturbed, for fear of what they might awaken.